10. Worst alcoholics in Hollywood history. Here goes my vote. That will shock you. They had it all: fame, talent, adoration. But behind the camera flashes and red carpets, these Hollywood legends were drowning in something far darker than the public ever saw. From shattered lives to careers cut tragically short. This isn't your typical celebrity expose. These are the 10 worst alcoholics in Hollywood history icons, whose addiction consumed everything. Some died in shame, others in secrecy, but all left behind a haunting legacy. Before you look away, ask yourself how many of your favorite stars are still hiding the same demons today. Watch to the end, and don't forget to subscribe to Uncovered Tinseltown Uncovered. Oliver Reed was the epitome of raw masculine energy on screen, magnetic, intense, and utterly unforgettable. But behind the scenes, his ferocious appetite for alcohol consumed not only his career, but eventually, his life. Known for his commanding roles in The Three Musketeers, Oliver and Gladiator Reed was also infamous for his wild, destructive drinking sprees that became as legendary as his performances. His alcoholism wasn't just public, it was chaotic and dangerous. His distinctive facial scars, the result of a bar fight while intoxicated, became a part of his trademark look. Despite promises to abstain during the filming of Gladiator, Reed couldn't resist the temptation. In fact, he died of a heart attack in 1999 after an epic drinking session in a pub in Malta. That night, he reportedly consumed 8 bottles of beer, 3 bottles of rum, and multiple shots of whiskey while arm wrestling sailors from the Royal Navy. Director Ridley Scott had warned Reed that the role of Proximo in Gladiator came with a caveat: no alcohol on set. Though Reed tried, it was a challenge he ultimately lost. His close friend Sir Christopher Lee once described how Oliver could transform into a monster after just a few drinks, making even his friends fear his presence. In a particularly brutal incident at age 35, Reed was ambushed in a nightclub bathroom and slashed with broken bottles, requiring 63 stitches across his face. He believed his career might be over, but returned to work as unrelenting as ever. Oliver Reed died doing what he loved: drinking and entertaining. But his legacy remains bittersweet. A brilliant actor whose screen presence was unmatched, yet one whose genius was dulled and life cut short by relentless addiction. Richard Burton was the embodiment of classical acting brilliance, a baritone voice, Shakespearean mastery, and a magnetic presence that commanded every scene. But beneath the surface of his cinematic elegance was a man deeply enslaved by alcohol. Burton began drinking at age 12, and it grew into a devastating addiction that defined much of his adult life. Famed for his tumultuous relationship with Elizabeth Taylor, he starred in acclaimed films like Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf and The Spy Who Came In From the Cold. Yet his brilliance was increasingly dimmed by excessive vodka consumption, up to 3 bottles daily at his worst. On film sets, he often had to perform while seated or lying down because he couldn't maintain balance. His off-screen exploits were equally disturbing. Once during a seaside shoot, he reportedly drank 21 shots of tequila before jumping into shark-infested waters, an impulsive act that showcased his reckless relationship with alcohol. Medical professionals warned him repeatedly his kidneys were enlarged, his liver was failing, and his spine had hardened due to crystallized alcohol deposits. He ignored them all. By the early 1980s, his body was breaking down. Though he continued to act, his performances were often a shadow of his former self. Burton passed away in 1984 at age 58, succumbing to a cerebral hemorrhage, attributed to his lifelong battle with alcohol. His once dashing image had been replaced by the face of a man physically worn by decades of abuse. Richard Burton left behind a towering legacy of artistry and tragedy. He was a master on stage and screen, but a prisoner in real life. His story remains one of Hollywood's most haunting cautionary tales. Immense talent can be both a gift and a burden, especially when addiction is allowed to run unchecked. Barbara Payton. Life reads like a cautionary tale. Hollywood pretended not to see glamour scandal and a descent so sharp it stunned even the tabloid press. Once a luminous blonde beauty who starred alongside heavyweights like James Cagney and Gregory Peck Payton, quickly became better known for her headlines than her talent. In the early 1950s, Payton was a promising B-list actress drawing attention for her sultry allure and rising star status. But behind the scenes, alcohol was tightening its grip. By the mid-50s, her drinking spiraled out of control. Legal trouble followed public intoxication, writing bad checks and prostitution arrests. She once appeared in court for being found asleep on a bus bench wearing a bathing suit and coat clearly under the influence. Her career collapsed rapidly. Once commanding $10,000 per week, she ended her life in poverty, shunned by studios and society alike. She lost custody of her son due to her chaotic lifestyle and was frequently in jail or wandering Sunset Boulevard intoxicated. One particularly sad moment came when she was arrested for disorderly conduct at a drunken afternoon party, with the media capturing her disheveled, unrecognizable appearance. By the 1960s, she looked nothing like the starlet she once was. Her face and body bore the wear of addiction, and her health deteriorated rapidly. On May 8, 1967, Barbara Payton died of heart and liver failure at the age of 39. Her tragic downfall was immortalized in the book I Am Not Ashamed, her raw, heartbreaking memoir detailing her journey into darkness. Payton's legacy is one of brilliance eclipsed by personal demons. She remains a symbol of what can happen when Hollywood's promises crash into reality and when the bottle becomes louder than the applause. John Barrymore. Patriarch of the famed Barrymore acting dynasty and grandfather of Drew Barrymore, was once hailed as the Great Profile, a leading figure of the stage and early cinema. Renowned for his powerful interpretations of Hamlet and Dr. Jekyll, Barrymore blended dramatic intensity with striking looks. But while his performances captivated audiences, his private life unraveled under the weight of chronic alcoholism. Barrymore's drinking began early and escalated into a full-fledged dependency. By the 1930s, his addiction became a public spectacle. He was caught trying to drink cologne when there was no liquor available, a dark indicator of his desperation. His once legendary memory deteriorated so badly that by 1936, he had to rely on cue cards to deliver his lines. Colleagues noted his increasing shakiness and inability to stay on script. Despite his decline, Barrymore continued acting, sometimes parodying his own drunkenness on screen. His performance in Dinner at 8, 1933 as a washed-up actor mirrored his real-life state, blurring the line between fiction and tragedy. By the 1940s, the alcohol had ravaged his body. He suffered from cirrhosis, kidney failure, and chronic edema. In 1942, at just 60 years old, Barrymore died. His passing was followed by one of Hollywood's most infamous rumors that a group of his hard-drinking friends, including Errol Flynn, borrowed his body and staged a macabre prank, seating him in Flynn's living room to frighten him upon returning home. While likely apocryphal, the story perfectly captures the chaotic circle Barrymore surrounded himself with. John Barrymore was a Shakespearean genius whose legacy was both remarkable and ruinous. His brilliance lit up the early 20th century stage and screen, but behind the curtain, the bottle slowly stole his soul. A giant in every sense, felled by an addiction he could never outact. John Michael Vincent was once the picture of all-American charm, handsome, athletic, and unmistakably cool. Rising to fame in the 1970s and 80s, he became a teen idol, then a primetime superstar in Airwolf, where he commanded a record-breaking salary of $200,000 per episode. But with fame came the trappings of excess, and Vincent's spiral into alcoholism and later drug abuse would undo everything. Discovered while serving in the California Army National Guard, Vincent was catapulted into stardom with roles alongside Hollywood heavyweights like Charles Bronson, Robert Mitchum, and Burt Reynolds. But the fast rise created a false sense of invincibility. With success came indulgence. He was arrested multiple times for DUI domestic violence and was involved in several high-speed crashes, one of which left him with a broken back. Another later in life resulted in the amputation of his right leg. As Vincent's addictions deepened, so did his isolation. During the peak years of Airwolf, his drinking and drug use delayed production and inflated budgets. He became notoriously unreliable. The once bankable star was soon blacklisted from major studios. Financial ruin followed. By the 2000s, he had declared bankruptcy and was living in obscurity. In interviews late in life, Vincent's voice was weak, his memory foggy, and his once celebrated looks barely recognizable. He suffered from peripheral artery disease and multiple organ failures. In 2019, he died of cardiac arrest at the age of 74, a quiet end to a man who once lit up screens with effortless charisma. John Michael Vincent remains one of the saddest Hollywood stories, a star who had it all, fame, money, and talent, but who couldn't outrun the darkness he kept drinking to escape. His legacy is not only one of talent, but also of lost potential consumed by addiction. Errol Flynn was the swashbuckling icon of 1930s and 40s Hollywood, dashing, daring, and devilishly charming. He embodied the romantic hero in classics like The Adventures of Robin Hood and Captain Blood, but behind the scenes, Flynn's real-life escapades made his on-screen adventures look tame. His addiction to alcohol, combined with a reckless hunger for chaos, made him a legend of excess and tragedy. Flynn didn't just drink, he celebrated drinking. His Malibu beach house, nicknamed Cirrhosis by the Sea, became notorious for non-stop parties drenched in booze, drugs, and scandal. Flynn's exploits included drinking with Fidel Castro, hosting wild orgies on his yacht, and betting money on seducing his co-stars. He even boasted that his autopsy would reveal his body pickled like a specimen. Flynn began experiencing severe health issues by his mid-30s. After collapsing in an elevator, doctors discovered irreversible heart and liver damage, but Flynn kept drinking anyway. His once slim frame grew bloated, his skin yellowed, and his youthful magnetism faded into a haunted mask. By the time he died in 1959, at just 50 years old, Flynn's body was a wreck ravaged by cirrhosis hepatitis and years of neglect. At the autopsy, the coroner remarked he had the organs of a 75-year-old man. Errol Flynn lived like a rock star before the term even existed, his life a whirlwind of glamour and self-destruction. Though his screen persona remains timeless, the reality was far darker. He remains a cautionary tale of how charisma and indulgence can burn out brilliance long before its time. Humphrey Bogart. The gravel-voiced legend of Casablanca, the Maltese Falcon, and the African Queen is often celebrated as the quintessential American actor. Yet beyond his cinematic brilliance, Bogart battled a relentless drinking problem that defined much of his off-screen life and eventually his death. Known to friends as Bogey, he was charming and sharp, but only until the clock struck midnight. A well-known saying among his peers was that Bogart was the nicest guy in the world until about 11:30 p.m. After that, alcohol transformed him into a darker version of himself, belligerent, brooding, and occasionally violent. Bogart often showed up to sets drunk or hungover. During the filming of Sahara, he reportedly refused to act until his then-wife brought him a thermos full of martinis. Another time, he disrupted the Warner Brothers studio by riding a bicycle in his pajamas after a night of drinking. He was also known to carry a toy panda bear with him to elite clubs, treating it as his drinking companion. When someone tried to take it away, he physically assaulted them. His marriage to Mayo Methot, known as Sluggy, was famously turbulent, fueled by mutual alcoholism and explosive arguments. Even after marrying Lauren Bacall, Bogart's drinking never truly stopped. His voice, once seductive, turned raspy from years of smoking and scotch. By 1956, he was diagnosed with esophageal cancer exacerbated by alcohol and tobacco abuse. Despite surgery, Bogart died in 1957 at the age of 57, still clinging to his glass of sherry until the very end. Bogart's legacy as a cinematic titan remains untouched. But behind the camera, he was a man at war with the bottle and icon whose self-destruction mirrored the tortured souls he so often portrayed. Peter O'Toole was magnetic, eloquent, and dangerously brilliant, an actor of Shakespearean power with a taste for chaos and a liver that endured decades of punishment. He soared to international fame in Lawrence of Arabia, earning the first of his 8 Oscar nominations, but his off-screen life spiraled into a blur of bar tabs, blackouts, and near-death experiences. From his early theater days, O'Toole drank heavily, often showing up to set bleary-eyed or outright intoxicated. During the filming of Beckett, he was so drunk he once arrived at a play with a date, only to realize he was the lead actor in the performance. His legendary binges included waking up in foreign cities without memory of how he got there. In one infamous tale, he claimed he found out about President Kennedy's assassination 22 years after it happened. Doctors warned him repeatedly. By the mid-1970s, his stomach was riddled with ulcers, and he underwent surgery that nearly killed him. That brush with death pushed O'Toole to quit drinking for a time, but the damage had already ravaged his health and appearance. In his final years, the gaunt, hollow-eyed man was a far cry from the golden-haired star of the 1960s. Yet despite it all, O'Toole remained intellectually sharp, often turning interviews into one-man performances. When he died in 2013 at age 81, it was the end of a career as defiant and intoxicating as the man himself. Peter O'Toole's legacy lives on in his performances, larger than life, fiercely intelligent, and emotionally raw. But his personal story remains one of the most sobering reminders of Hollywood's long love affair with excess. W.C. Fields. William Claude. Dukenfield was a comic genius with a bitter twist. A man whose grumpy, drunken persona on screen was only a thin veil over his real-life dependence on alcohol. Known for his nasal delivery, biting wit, and disdain for children and dogs, Fields was one of early Hollywood's most original voices. But his fondness for gin became the central conflict of his life. Fields didn't just drink, he mastered the art of hiding it. On set, he often filled water bottles with gin, sneaking sips between takes. Colleagues described him as funny but irritable, with severe tremors and episodes of delirium tremens. At his worst, he was consuming 2 quarts of gin daily, a staggering amount by any standard. By the late 1930s, his body was breaking down. Paramount dropped him in 1938 after his health became too unreliable. He found refuge on radio, especially in his comedic feud with ventriloquist Edgar Bergen and the puppet Charlie McCarthy, which revived his career. Still, Fields couldn't quit the bottle. He spent his last 2 years at the Las Encinas Sanatorium in Pasadena, suffering from gastric hemorrhages, liver damage, and chronic fatigue. Ironically, he died on Christmas Day, 1946, a holiday he openly mocked. Despite his legendary humor, Fields' tragic personal battle was no laughing matter. His wit was razor-sharp, but it masked the toll of addiction. A trailblazer in comedy, W.C. Fields remains a symbol of the fine line between brilliance and self-destruction. Bernard Lee was a respected British character actor best known for portraying M, the steely head of MI6 in 11 James Bond films. But behind his stoic on-screen presence was a man privately battling immense grief and a debilitating alcohol problem that almost derailed his career. Lee's troubles began after a series of devastating personal losses. In the early 1970s, he lost his wife in a tragic house fire and was brutally mugged not long after. These events sent him spiraling into depression and eventually deep alcoholism. His behavior grew erratic, his health visibly deteriorated, and by the late 70s, his drinking was interfering with work. On the set of the Edgar Wallace Mysteries, his addiction became so severe that he was reportedly locked inside his dressing room during breaks to prevent access to alcohol. In one extreme case, Lee allegedly paid someone to pass a straw through the keyhole so he could drink without being seen. His colleagues, including the hard-drinking Richard Burton, admitted that Lee's tolerance for alcohol was unmatched. Yet his professionalism endured barely. As his health worsened, so did his roles, and he faded from the spotlight. Lee passed away in 1981 at age 73 officially from stomach cancer, though many suspected it was the long-term consequence of relentless alcohol abuse. Bernard Lee's legacy is both heroic and heartbreaking. He gave life to one of cinema's most iconic authority figures, yet off-camera, he was a man crushed by sorrow and dependent on the very thing that dulled his pain. His story reminds us that even the most composed faces can hide the deepest fractures. Hollywood has always spotlighted fame, fortune, and unforgettable performances, but rarely the silent battles behind the scenes. These 10 legendary actors weren't just victims of addiction, they were artists, innovators, and icons whose talents often masked the torment within. So, before we judge, let's remember, alcoholism doesn't discriminate even among the greatest. At Uncovered Tinseltown Uncovered, we honor the full truth, flaws, genius, and all. Which story surprised you the most? And do you think Hollywood does enough today to protect its stars from the same fate? Let us know in the comments, and keep the conversation honest.